Hello everyone, Chaucerian Myth here. First video as sort of the artist for the Dungeon Synth project. I talked to a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but on the Facebook page about doing a video where I discussed all of the tracks on the Canterbury Tales album, track by track, going through every one of them, sort of talking about them, analyzing them, what went on while I was composing them, whatnot. I suggested the idea kind of a long time ago, and it seemed that people were on board for it, and I know the new album still isn't out yet, so I wanted to give people something to do in regards to the project until that comes out. It's going to be coming out very soon. At the end of the month, very beginning of February at the latest, but I'm hoping that doesn't come out that late. Hoping for a physical copy. There's no talks or anything about that yet. I might contact Out of Season again, because they just did such a great job with the Canterbury Tales. But without further ado, I'm just going to go through the album track by track. It's a big album. It took a long time to make. I'm going to try to make it to where it doesn't take as long talking about it as it would actually listening to it. And I hope that for people who have already listened to the album, or even just some of it, you're able to get a little more out of it from maybe hearing this. And for those who maybe haven't listened to it, maybe it will get you interested. First track on the album, General Prologue. There's not much to say about this one. It's fairly short, fairly simple, but when I decided to make the album, and I decided to really do it with every single tale from the story, which was not originally how it was going to be, I decided that I should also include the General Prologue, because in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the General Prologue really is a very important part of the story, and I wanted a song to reflect it. Sort of the themes being, framing the story itself. You have sort of a moment of reflection in which the narrator, who is maybe Geoffrey Chaucer, is sort of reflecting on and ruminating on the characters of the story that are around him. So sort of, a sound of, reflection, relaxation after a long travel, and sort of settling in after that sort of travel. Almost a weariness is sort of what I was going for, but not, negative. Definitely relaxation after being weary. I wanted to utilize pastoral sounds, because, we're there at the Tavern Inn, which was, not exactly maybe pastoral itself, but, certainly not as developed as it would be not even, not too long afterwards. So, utilizing sounds like an English horn, which is definitely a signifier of something, older, pastoral, less developed, going into, an organic sort of classical guitar sound, and later on a weird kind of synth ocarina thing, definitely very gentle sounds here, going sort of for reflection, weariness being then put at ease, definitely sort of an overture, an introductory track, and I hoped the same way that the General Prologue was in the text. Second track, The Knight's Tale, an interesting one. This one seemed to get kind of popular on its own. It's pretty much the only track from the Canterbury Tales that I see people download as a single track, as opposed to just downloading the whole album. It's usually just The Knight's Tale. Which I thought very interesting. It does seem to have a pretty classic Dungeon Synth sound in a lot of ways, in terms of utilizing, like video game kind of sounds and those sorts of, synths and whatnot, very synthetic sounds. So very different from the first track, and that's because the knight and tale is, of course, very different from the general prologue. It takes us from something that's kind of, relaxed, that kind of environment, to one that's definitely a lot more, strident, bold. And so I had the song start out on that kind of note, very bold, and almost kind of badass, because that's where the story, starts, is that the knight Theseus in the knight story, who is much like the knight himself. So this one is sort of a synthesis of the tale and the character. So it was an easier song to write than a lot of the ones on the album, where I had to sort of, be like, how much do I write this about the character, and how much do I write this about the character's tale? I tried to get at least, a little bit of both in every single song on the album. But for this, it was sort of all wrapped up in one, while also capturing specific moments from the tale itself. So definitely the beginning, when the character, the Duke Theseus, the knight in the story, has just, finished conquering, Greek city, the city of the Amazons. I have the name here, I don't remember everything. Scythia. He's just overthrown Scythia. So, very bold sort of beginning. It throws us, right in the middle, of, the action. So I have it starting out there, very bold bass lines, and I doubled the bass lines, one octave above, because when I had originally wrote it, the original bass line was very low, and when I imported it in to the digital audio workstation, it just wasn't any good. It was too low to sound any good. And if you have a nice bass sound, it'll be very strong. It'll provide a nice foundation. But if you get to it, where it's too low, if you have an 88 key keyboard and you're hitting that very last one, the very lowest note, which is like an E zero or something, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's very weak. It almost doesn't even have its own sound. It doesn't have much character. So I added in an octave above, and that was a lot stronger. And then, rather than taking out the lower one, I actually added it. So you got 2 octave bass, which would be your regular, pretty low bass line, and then even below it, sounding really sort of cavernous and giving it, I think, a much more powerful character in depth than just having, the standard bass line, which I think would have sounded fine. Certainly originally the way I had it, too low, it would have just sounded bad. But I think that change was very good for it. In the story, there's lots of battles going on. There's, of course, a duel between, 2 of the main characters, Palamon and Arcite, which is viewed as, not knightly, and, they do so unchivalrously and without honor. There's jousts, there's the tournament at the end, between Palamon and Arcite, to decide who gets Emily, the woman, the object of their desire. And so the longing also plays a part, and I really tried to convey that as well, with some softer moments. There's definitely some bold, harsh moments in here, especially in the beginning, and then I try to have some softer moments, and I try to have push and pull, because really the Knight's Tale, and I'm going a lot of this from memory, so a lot of people who, the last time I read a lot of the Canterbury Tales was when I wrote this album months ago, and I'm pretty familiar with it, so I just skimmed a lot of the tales when reading this, and the Knight's Tale is one of the more popular ones, so I didn't read that one all the way through, but important things about the Knight's Tale, read it several times. It's definitely a journey of reason, and you get the very sort of, the person who exemplifies reason at the beginning, and that's Theseus, the knight. The whole reason why he has to overthrow the Amazons is because, at least in this story, in the Middle Ages, the Amazon society of warrior women needed, male rationality and reason to correct that sort of social disorder. So reason is a big thing here, and you see Palamon and Arcite, their journey is really sort of to find this reason, chivalrous, knightly, rationality. And it is a journey between, passion and rationality. Okay, so you see that a lot, and I really tried to sort of document that in the song. So I do things like, I have the theme in the beginning with the bass line. I have that come back later, sort of signifying the tournament where, Palamon and RC, they're doing battle. So it's definitely battle music, but they're doing so finally in a chivalrous and knightly way. So you have the music come back from when we first introduced the knight, which is supposed to be at the beginning. So that's sort of to reflect the fact that they have finally found, reason. They're fighting with honor, chivalrously, to code. Code is a very big deal in these times, more in medieval times, than in Greek times, I think. But that's beside the point. So longing is there. You sort of have these moments of tension. There's softness, but it's also tense. And I really tried to get that going because, of course, Palamon and RC, they're both, they both want the same object of desire to them. And so in that way, there's a lot going on there about courtly love, female agency. That's a little harder to get in a song, but you try to get it all there. And at the end, these real magical, softer sounds. The final, sort of conclusion to the song, much softer. Definitely, to me, I think I want to represent sort of a culmination of the journey, from passion to reason. And also, the gods are very much involved in this. Chaucer likes to do that. Sometimes he does so ironically, sometimes he does so satirically. But in this story, they were, of course, very involved in their own ways. I think Palamon, Arcite, and Emily both prayed all the different gods before the tournament. I don't remember to which gods they prayed to exactly. One of them prays to Venus, I'm sure, but I don't remember who. And that's not that important right now. But it's definitely interesting. I definitely wanted to push and pull, some synthetic string sounds that were very nice. For the real ruckus parts, some timpani, which is very nice. That's of course like the percussion of choice in a lot of Dungeon Synth. But I really do like it. And when I wrote this song, of course, I was, first, going into the genre. So I was very fascinated by all the different kinds of Dungeon Synth there were. For such a niche genre, it's really very diverse. And so this kind, I really liked. I like all kinds. But I wanted to do something like this after the general prologue, and it was perfect for the Knight's Tale. Because I was going in order on this album. It's in order the way they appear in the text. Alright, the third track, The Miller's Tale. One of my personal favorites on the album. I wrote the whole thing in 7/8. Partly because I realized that, if I'm gonna make an album this long, that could potentially be very long. I didn't know how long it was going to be as I was writing it. I didn't plan for anything like that, but I figured, 26 tracks, some of them were getting quite long, it's gonna be kind of long. I should mix it up, I'd already planned on mixing up, different sorts of sounds of Dungeon Synth, but I thought also different time signatures, make it sound different. So 7/8, one of my favorite time signatures. I'm a big progressive rock fan, so this kind of stuff, sort of came natural anyway, so I thought this would be a really good way to mix it up. Most of the album is in 4/4 or 3/4, but there's definitely some songs that are in weird time signatures to mix it up and make it more interesting for people who are going to listen to it. I really didn't want a lot of the songs to sound the same. I was definitely, not wanting that to happen. And then 7/8 also, it's an odd, sort of off-kilter time signature, and then also the story is sort of off-kilter. So it really worked also thematically, because, the story is about, this guy, whose wife is cheating on him with someone he's renting his room out to. And it's very funny. There's a lot of puns in the story. It's very bawdy. So it's, got some dirty humor and whatnot, especially for the medieval period. It might sound kind of tame to us now, but it's a pretty funny story. If you don't want to read it in the Middle English, I do suggest reading it, translated. It's not as pretty, but it's worth it to understand it, because it's pretty humorous, I think, even to today's sensibilities. This one, talking about mixing up sounds as well, comes right after The Knight's Tale, which, is big and bold, and, a lot of very classic sort of synth work. This one is pretty opposite of that. It starts out pretty soft. It's a lot more folk sounding. Starts out with a single flute melody, and then I just sort of wanted to build on top of that. So for most of the song, you have this melody in 7/8, and things are sort of layering on top of that as it goes along. And I liked the idea of starting sort of in the middle, with a middle melody, not with harmonies, not with bass, not with something up high, which would also be weird, but in the middle. So then you get the bass stuff. I have, in there harpsichord. Later on in the song, you get the addition of woodwind chords, and I think this is the first song that I really used that in this way. You can hear it later on, I don't know when, maybe around the 5-minute mark, I think, the woodwind chords, and they sound so sweet, I think. Woodwind chords with clarinet, English horn, oboe, bassoon, sometimes a flute. I make it a part of the chord. I didn't for this song because I have 2 flute parts already, one playing a melody and then one playing, not really bass notes because it's not in the bass register, but accompanying harmony, a second voice to the flute. But yeah, those sort of a woodwind quartet playing chords, which I think sounds great, and I've since returned to it many times. There's a few other times in this album when I've used it in the Canterbury Tales, and then on the new album I think there's 1 or 2 songs where they show up as well. I try to do it differently every time, but just having woodwinds play chords with each other, they blend so well, and the sound is so sweet and nice. And it can also be a little bit melancholy, which is also very good, because I wanted to introduce some darker tones in the sound as well. And they're brief, but you can definitely hear them. Excuse me. And I wanted to introduce those at certain points, to sort of illustrate the plight of, poor John, who is, being made a fool of in his own house right under his nose. It's one of those things that's, it's funny but sad, but it is funny. And so it's humorous, it's light. The general, I think, tone of the song is kind of whimsical, like the story. But then there are also dark segments, where the timpani sort of comes in, like the B section to certain parts of the song. And that sort of is to indicate, John's predicament, if you will. Musically, I do like this one a lot. I like the way it builds. I like the way all of the counter melodies play off each other, because there's a lot. Between the bass line on the harpsichord, which is pretty melodic, and, the flute and all of these other things going on. I really like it. Strings get introduced at some point, so it's a very busy song, but I never think, some people might disagree, I never thought that it sounded cluttered, or, I never thought that it even sounded particularly, busy, or frenetic, or anxious, or anything. I think it keeps, almost calm, sort of whimsical, definitely light, folky tune, and just a nice tone throughout, except in the darker sections that I mentioned, where the percussion sort of comes in. But I was definitely very proud of this one. It took a very long time to write. which is surprising because it's a little bit repetitive. It's just melodies building on top of each other. But it took one of the longest times to write of any song on the album, and I'm definitely very proud of this one. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, in the text, the Reeve's Tale is sort of a thematic continuation from the Miller's Tale, in that it's sort of weird, it's a comedy, it's very bawdy, very sexual, and so I decided to do this as well for the song on the album. So you have something going on like you did with the Miller's Tale. There's stuff building on top of each other gradually. But I wanted it to be different, because the Reeve's Tale, you know, it's a different story. There's different stuff going on. And so I wanted more of a push and pull. It's not as linear as the Miller's Tale was, where it was just you have this and things are building and you get more as the song goes on and that's just it. With some exceptions, but there's a lot more push and pull going on in the Reeve's Tale. You get more isolated bits, and then you get more than one thing coming in. I'm probably not explaining it very well, but one thing that really caught me about the story was that it's definitely a satire of courtly love, or at least some of it is satirizing courtly love, which was, you know, very popular at the time. You know, high romance, definitely a satire of that. So I decided, you know, to sort of go all out with that aesthetic. You know, there's harps, you know, going on. I made it in a waltz, and to me, I wanted to make it sound very romantic, very whimsical, very dancey. So I think I accomplished that part. And I had to decide about how to go about it, because I think for a lot of modern audiences, unlike the Miller's Tale, the Reeve's Tale might sound a little bit dark. There's allusions to what we now, I think, would consider, you know, rape. It wasn't considered so in the text, and it was all done for comedy, because, you know, we're talking about the Middle Ages. But I had to decide how I wanted to go about it. And I eventually decided to focus on the aesthetic of, you know, making fun of the high romance, sort of keeping the whimsical aspect that Chaucer was going for. And I think I did that, and it's shorter. Much shorter than the Miller's Tale. The Miller's Tale is over 11 minutes. This one is almost 4 minutes, not quite. So I think I accomplished what I wanted to do with it. I like a lot of the sounds used, you know, to allude to some of the dark plotting stuff going on. I inserted, you know, some darker tones in there. You know, the first things you hear, there's a bassoon, which to me has sort of a more dark, throaty, kind of almost human tone to it. So that is sort of one thing where you can recognize that, you know, because it is plotting. You know, they are these two characters plotting against the Reeve, rightfully so, because the Reeve is an asshole. But there's a lot of shady shit going on in the Reeve's Tale, and so I wanted to sort of exemplify that it is romance, it is whimsical, but, you know, among that and underneath it, there's a lot of dark, weird stuff going on too.